Well, we're back on this today, and I've already been working on it for about an hour or so. I've got most of my stuff fitted up. I've got my spacer and my rod, well, my spacer's set up, already been drilled and tapped into the ball screw mount for the ball screw itself, and or for the ball nut itself. And The got my bar set in place, and it's a press fit in between the two nuts, or between the four nuts on the ball screw mount. So I've got it set up temporarily in place here. Just slid the spindle back in just to check how it was going to set and what our clearances were and everything, and it looks pretty good. So if I pull this back out, although my rod's about a ½ inch too long, I'm going to shorten it up a ½ inch. And if I get this out of the way again, so this is just slid in place, and this is my mount assembly. I still have to drill and countersink and tap maybe just 2 screws. I'd originally planned on 4. We'll lay them out and see. I'd like to have 4 probably, but we'll see what comes out of it. And the other end, I'm going to shorten it up a ½ inch, and I'll just shave it off in the middle. That way I know I'm square to the world. We've got clearance over our gear, so we'll have room for our belt to fit in there and a little guard to go over the top. And let's see, of course we've narrowed this end of our bearing mount down a little bit just to match our plate, so we're down close enough to where we're not gonna cut into our screws, but we shaved it down a little bit. That'll give us a little extra clearance or a little extra travel inside. And then we shaved both sides of it just to match, which in the real picture of things nobody will ever see except me, which I've seen it when I'm putting it together, and now you've seen it. But in real world application, does it make a bit of difference? No, but it looks nice. So one of the things to always remember when you're playing in your shop is make sure you're playing in your shop. You know, it's got to be fun. Did I gain anything by doing the extra machining on it, spending an extra ½ an hour probably on it? Not a thing, other than it made me happy. So just make sure you're playing in your shop for the right reasons. So I'm going to go ahead, set this up just like it is here, because I think alignment looks pretty good. And we're going to drill and tap and fix that. We're going to shorten this up. Then we'll set it up one more time and figure out what we've got to do to that base plate, exactly how we're going to mount it. Plan is to run 2 probably 1/4 button head cap screws up through the bottom to lock it in place. Well, we're doing final adjustments on fit up now. What I did was I've got everything mounted, with the exception of I still have to drill and tap for the ball screw on the top end here to mount the top. But we've got it to where we have motion on it, and it feels relatively smooth all the way through its travel. And like I say, there'll be final alignment and adjustment on it, but everything looks pretty good. Anyway, it travels all the way down through there. What I did was I turned down the little boss that was on the bottom of this, and just drilled it for 1/4 inch bolts. We've got 1/4-20s through there. I drilled it one size oversized, so I've got a little bit of adjustment there. And we just bolted it right into our aluminum bar through the end. And let's see if we run it all the way back. And we've got our plate drilled and tapped on both ends, so it's where it's going to mount now. So if we turn it around like this is the way it looks on this end. And I've marked where this goes now. I just got to disassemble it and set it back up to the mill and drill and tap it. When you don't have power on these, it takes a while to get them back where they belong. And there's the top end of all our mounting. So we just want to make sure it's smooth all the way through its travel. We'll want it to be smooth all the way up to the top, because with our power drawbar on this, why it has to come pretty much clear to the top of its travel before it will engage. Although we can make some adjustments there, but everything else looks okay. I think it's time to disassemble it. Go ahead and drill and tap this. We'll go ahead and smooth up and paint up our plate before we reassemble it, because that should be the last time we have to do that. While I've got it at this stage, I want to decide my zert fitting will go either in this position here or up here on this position. And I think what I will probably do is flip it over so it's in this position here, and we'll just do a little access port on the side of the casting so we can run a grease gun in there to grease that ball screw. I haven't cleaned this up at all, but this will mount in here. And we've got a little bit of interference with this, so we'll have to probably relieve the back of our plate just a little bit. I'll go ahead and drill and tap it where our bearing block is going, and then we'll relieve a little cutout in there. If we have to, we can relieve a little bit of this material here, because it adjusts from that position, yeah, in that range there. So anyway, that's not a major issue there. I had anticipated that. So yeah, all in all, it's looking pretty good, I think. So we'll address those two little issues, get this painted up, reinstalled, and then it's on to the motor mount. Well, we don't have our spindle back in yet, but we've got our ball screw mounted in here, and we've got it drilled and tap bolted on this end. I went ahead and cut out the center of this between the mounting holes just to give clearance for our belt tensioner that goes here. I think that gives us enough clearance. If it's still too close, why, we'll just grind off the edge of that of the tensioner itself where it pivots there. So the next thing to do is and I've got to get some more screws yet, but there's a zert fitting for the ball screw that sits right here. I know you can't see it very well, but it's right there on the edge of that ball screw. And the same place I put on all the ball screws for the most part. So what I'm going to do is I've kind of laid out where I think the hole should be, and I'm going to put a hole right there for access to that grease zert when we get the grease zert installed there. And to do that, I'm just going to set it up on the mill table, clamp it in place, and bore a hole through there, and probably about an inch hole. It doesn't really make any difference, just so I've got access to it, and can get on and off of it with a grease gun. So we're going to do that. Once we get that done, we'll bring it back, go ahead and mount the spindle back in it, which I've had the spindle in it before, and we've got it. Seems to mount real well. You know, I have no problems with that. And the other end of this looks like this right here. That will mount in that position. And we've got clearance all the way around, so I don't see a problem there. Once I get that done, get the spindle back in it, why, then we'll lay out where we want to put the stepper motor mount. And it's going to mount right here, I'm sure. And we'll have to figure out the positioning of that, because we'll want to be able to run our belt around, so we want to be sure and clear our nose here, make sure we're not too close. And yeah, I'd like to tuck it as close as I can right back up here onto this side. Right in there someplace. So it's going to be so we're going to mount it something very similar to that right there is where it's going to mount along there someplace. Alright, well, we just had a little foobar here, and went to reassemble it, and my holes wouldn't line up here to mount the quill onto my little linkage there. And what it ended up being was the ball nut itself in there is evidently machined crooked, because I had to flip it over. You know, there's two positions it can go in, 180 either way, and I had fitted it up with it turned the other way, which in reality was kind of the wrong way, because now I've cut my hole in the side of the mill head to accept a grease gun, and now my grease zert will be on the other side because it doesn't line up with the setup. So interesting little turn of events there. I'll have to address that, and I've got a way to take care of that without drilling any more holes. We're just gonna use what we've got. And so I had not anticipated that at all. I assumed it was going to be relatively true to the world. But that's part of what you deal with when you use these really inexpensive components. Every once in a while you'll get something that's not right. I've had real good luck with all the other ball screws and nuts and everything that I've used over the last few years. But this was not the case on this one. So anyway, that's the way that's going to go. Now, if we get our motor over here, that looks pretty good. So the next thing will be motor and motor mount. Let's figure out which way we want this all to go. Let me set this up here. Problem I see with this is our camming action is not necessarily away from where we're going to want everything to pivot. Let's see. Alright, so if we set it here, here like this, we can pivot up and away a little bit, but we don't have a whole lot there. If we were to move it more in this way, but I don't know if that really gives us enough mounting for what we want. If we turn it over the other way. Okay, now that may very well give us enough, although I'm not sure about my eyeball engineering here. Okay, now if we set it right there, we can tentatively go with a one size shorter belt. That doesn't give us a whole lot of adjustment, but I think that does give us clearance for everything. So, if we cut that to our arc right there, it will either work or it won't work. So I think I'll go ahead, I'm just going to cut this with a hacksaw, then we'll set it up on the mill and get out the boring head. A little bit of hacksaw action. We'll set it up in the mill, dig out the boring head, and round that up a little bit. There's still going to be quite a bit of hand fitting to it. It's not going to want to sit flat on that casting, so we'll make modifications probably by hand to this mount. We'd probably just go ahead and finish it out by hand and it'd be just fine, but I think we'll probably set it up in the mill because we can. With our eyeball engineering here, like I say, we still got to cut this in the mill, but then we may need to move this assembly down a little bit to get alignment, and we're a little bit cocked. So hand fitting underneath will help. If we have to shim it, we may have to do a washer stack, do a bushing standoff to set it off. I think probably about 3 bolts through here is what we'll use to anchor it down with. And we've got an existing hole up here. We may run another plate down here to hold us at 90 degrees once we figure out what that positioning is. So all up in the air, nothing major as long as we get alignment. This gear is pretty much where it's got to sit now. We've got it mounted, and I'm happy with that positioning, so we'll have to adjust our motor accordingly. The motor tucks up pretty nice. It looks like it'll tension. I think we'll be able to go with a shorter belt when we actually do set it up. But everything looks good. We've got room. We can actually move this bearing down on this gear down on the shaft to help with alignment too. So we've got lots of room for movement. All right, here's my bracket set up. Got the boring bar cut up. I've already made a couple of cuts just to make sure we've got our diameter about right and everything. We just set it up on a couple of parallels to where we've got clearance, and then clamped it down with our makeshift clamps here. Just kind of centered it up on the table to where I thought it looked good. We set the boring bar up to no specific dimension. I just matched it to my scribe line here, and we're awful close to being where I think it should be. So we're just going to continue to cut it until we clean everything up and get at least past our line, And we've got at least one mounting hole I'm going to try and use, which is on the back side here. I'll show you when we get it unclamped, but I'm just going to continue to cut it to where it looks good to clean up my cuts, and we're going to call her good there. Alright, that's a pretty good surface there. I've got one little divot here. I think it was probably part of a countersink or something like that in the bracket before. I'm just going to leave it. We'll have to manually bevel this edge because there's going to be a bevel. Anytime you're fitting up to a casting, it's never exact. So let's go ahead while we got it set up here. We're just going to bob this corner off with an end mill. Alright, I think we'll leave that right there, and we're going to say we've got everything good. So there's our cut, and I just knocked the edge off with a deburring tool, and most of the edges. And we'll take, when we actually do the final fit, we'll round this corner and probably round this corner, just break those edges so they look a little bit nicer and there's nothing sharp sticking out to bite me anytime. So let's see what it looks like over here. Okay, like I say, I expect to have to radius this bottom edge, or this edge, which will be to the inside. I plan on it sitting right up there someplace, and with the motor on it, it's going to look something similar to and I've got this pulley loose, so we can't use it as a reference surface right now. I may have to drill it differently for it to line up. When I initially set it up, it was out here far enough to where the set screws didn't line up, so we may have to go back into the shoulder on it and drill a couple of set screws, which would be just fine. I do have one shorter belt than the one I was setting it up here on it. When I was messing with it before, why I didn't know exactly what belt length I wanted. So I do have it one size shorter in stock. See, the way it's sitting there in that tight, we don't have enough, we don't have the full travel. See, that's all the farther back it will go. We don't have adjustment to come up enough. Let's see, what do we need to do here? That only gives us about half the travel that we had before, where it's sitting right there. So what happens if we... Actually mounted right there would give us all of the adjustment we needed, and that is with our longer belt. Looks like it's hitting on the last ear of the stepper motor. And that's why it'll only drop back as far as it does. Once we get everything else fitted, we could either relieve that last ear, or we could relieve the casting just a little bit to get it to fit in there. All in all, that's not too bad, I think. We may have to, as I said before, we may have to shim the brackets out or reinforce it some way. Looks like it wants to cant back just a little bit where it needs to cam down some. So I think we'll plan on mounting it right there. And you know, if this doesn't fit, why at some point we may have to build a new motor mount for it. But we're trying to utilize what we've already got. So let's see what we come up with. So if we go on the assumption that that's where we want things, and we know we're going to have to relieve that back edge, I think I'm going to go ahead and drill and tap this first hole, and that'll at least give me a reference point. Then we can fit off of that and make sure we've got everything else right. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to drill that one by hand. We'll run a pilot down through there and drill and tap that one and go on from there. Alright, just lightly rounded the corners, beveled this inside edge. If we can get it up here where we can see it a little bit you can see. So that should sit up there just about like that. Okay, as I tighten that down, I see it camming the plate down, so we probably got to relieve that inside edge a little bit more. But let's see how it looks with our motor on it now. Okay, so we've got a little bit of adjustment on there, but not as much as we could have. Like I say, it's the ear on that, on the stepper motor. Oh, tight, tight, tight. Tight, 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 and this is our bigger belt, yeah. Just offhand, the alignment doesn't look too bad. I think that's going to look okay, or I think that's going to work okay. We may have to do a little bit of finagling with it, and we may find that our plate is too thick. I'd like to drop that stepper down just a little bit, so we can either build a spacer to space our whole bracket down, which is probably the smart thing to do, or else we can relieve about a 1/4 inch on the back side of the motor mount bracket and set the whole thing down, which would actually weaken the bracket a little bit. Probably not enough to make a bit of difference. And either way, that will probably give us our clearance to get the full adjustment. So I'm going to say that this is where we want our mount, right here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and lay it out for probably 2 more holes. And one of them is going to be that one right there. We'll just open it up, and then we'll put 1 more down here. And that will mount our bracket. So that looks pretty good. Here's my bracket. I drilled and tapped, or drilled and countersunk 2 more holes in the bracket. I still got to drill and tap the 2 holes for there. I think that will be plenty strong. I did relieve the casting a little bit on the back side for that ear, so we got a little more adjustment travel. This is just about the bottom of travel there. But we've got enough adjustment to where when we come out there, we can get belt tension on that. And this is with our longer belt, so I think it'll work just fine. Alignment looks pretty good. I haven't really checked it really close yet, but everything looks pretty good, I think. My only concern, like I say, is where this pulley is going to sit in relation to lining up with this one. And I'm probably going to have to drill 2 more holes into the shaft, I'm imagining. But we'll do a final fit up there to decide. We've got lots of material there. It's just that these two screw holes in here for the set screws are too far out on the shaft, so we'll have to go back and drill them into this shoulder. So I'm going to go ahead, pull our motor back off. We'll drill and tap these 2 mounting holes and get it bolted back up, and then I think we can do the final fit for the gearing for the drive on this. And then the next thing will probably be to... What is going to be the next thing? The next thing's probably going to be to think about where we're going to mount the limit switch for the Z-axis, and then we'll have to see about getting some power to this and seeing how well it's going to move. So, coming along. Alright, well, I think we've got our motor mount pretty well situated. What I ended up and did was I shimmed the back side of this just a little bit. It was just a little bit out of plumb. So I shimmed it just a little bit, just a couple little pieces of aluminum. Nice little aluminum shims underneath there. And we've tightened it down. And belts, still alignment is not perfect on it. I don't know if we can see this or not. It's riding to the inside of this one and to the outside of that one. It may or may not be something I have to address, but everything's on there. We've got plenty of belt tension. I did relieve the casting a little bit just back of the one ear on the stepper motor. I've got cable affixed up here with a cable clamp that was already on this cable. This I do not believe is where it's going to actually mount the cable, but I already had the hole drilled and tapped there for something else when it was mounted before. So I just mounted it back there to act as a strain release so I don't have all this cable working on the back of the stepper motor. I don't want to take a chance on ripping the cables out of there and having to deal with that. So everything's mounted up. We've got clearance, it looks like, for everything. We've got good tension on the belt that we had on there. There's our clearance on the back side. And of course we've got our mounting for our ball screw here in the back. So this is pretty well, this point is pretty well done to the point of now I think I need to put power to it and see how it's going to act. I still have to figure out how I'm going to mount my limit switch on this, and I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet. I'm kind of leaning towards just putting a bracket out here and running a bracket, maybe off of this. Something along those lines with just to keep it up and out of the way and fairly simple. Ideally it would be better if I could mount it clear at the top up in here at the head of the casting, but then it interferes with the belt guard. I'd like to have it mounted probably right here on this side. I don't know that it makes a whole lot of difference what side it would mount on. That's a pretty nice installation. That looks pretty clean. I'm pretty happy with that. But I could potentially mount a limit switch, I suppose, over here. Not going to be any advantage to having it on this side as opposed to the other, and the other side's closer to where the wiring controls will be. So it'd probably be a little bit easier to route wiring here. Otherwise, this portion is pretty well done. I still have to address the issue of lubricating the ball screw nut, or the ball nut. But I've got a couple of ideas for that, but that's a thing for another day. I'm probably going to change the tensioner for the motor a little bit. It's just a spring-loaded plunger that kind of pushes tension against the motor, and then you lock it in place. That's always been kind of a marginal setup in my opinion. I'd like to have a little more positive adjustment on that, so while I've got it apart, I may very well build a new, probably a threaded shaft, so we can tension that with a lock nut and everything, and have a proper belt tension on there. But otherwise, looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy so far. So won't be too long, we'll have this back together. Anyway, I think I'm going to end this right here. I'm about done for the day. I got a couple little things to do on the mill yet, and a little cleanup around here. But hopefully you found this a little bit interesting. And comments or suggestions, leave them in the comments section for me below. And as always, thanks for taking the time to watch.